Recording in progress.
Okay. All right, we'll call this meeting to order. It is the Provo Municipal Council meeting agenda at 5:30 today, Tuesday, January 31st, 2023. Meetings of the Municipal Council are being held in hybrid fashion. That is, members of the public can view council meetings on YouTube and Facebook, or they may attend in person in the council chambers at Provo City Hall. I remind participants to mute your microphone when not speaking to minimize the potential for background noises and conversations be picked up, recorded, and broadcast to all. We'll do a roll call. We have Travis Hoban, Councilor George Hanley, Councilwoman Rachel Whipple, myself, Catrice McKay, Councilman Dave Shipley, and Councilman Fillmore. Today's prayer will be provided by Mark Ao. Amen. Thank you. The Pledge of Allegiance will be provided by Councilor McKay.
Of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
As indicated on the screen, a required public comment will be held for certain agenda items prior to council action. After each item has been presented, time to comment will be provided for all those who wish to speak. For items that do not require public hearing, public comment will still be taken following presentation of the item, but will be limited to 10 minutes. At this time, up to 15 minutes have been set aside for an open public comment period, which is intended to allow comments on matters that do not appear on the agenda. Persons who speak during this time to an item that is on the agenda will not normally be afforded a second opportunity to speak during the comment period specific to that item. During any public comment period, each speaker will generally be limited to 2 minutes. Due to noticing requirements, no formal action will be taken in this meeting on matters that do not appear on the agenda. Those with comments are invited to approach the podium. Those participating on Zoom will need to use the raise hand feature to indicate they wish to comment. The chair may choose to alternate between in-person and online commenters. Please begin your comments by stating your name and your city of residence. You will have 2 minutes to speak. Do we have anyone here for public comment? Doesn't look so. Okay. First, we'll be hearing a resolution consenting to appointments of individuals to the Records Appeal Board, and this will be presented by Mayor Kafusi.
Thank you, Chair McKay, Vice Chair Whipple, and members of the Municipal Council. I am recommending the following appointments to Provo City boards and commissions as indicated below and submit them here with the council's advice and consent. Karen Ellingson. Karen works in Provo as a grandma specialist for BYU Police. She holds a current records officer certification through the State of Utah's Division of Archives and Records Service. I am recommending Karen be appointed to an open position on the Record Appeals Board. And the second is Amanda Erkenbrack. Amanda is currently the Director of Customer Service for Provo City. However, her experience as the former city recorder gives her the necessary expertise needed to make informed decisions on appeals, as well as a deep understanding of the overall duties of the board. I am recommending Amanda be appointed to an open position on the Record Appeals Board. Thank you.
Is there any council discussion on the names? Okay, we're going to call for a vote. Counselor Ellsworth,
Yes.
Counselor Fillmore,
Yes.
Counselor Hanley,
Yes.
Counselor Hoban,
Yes.
Counselor McKay, yes. Counselor Shipley,
Yes.
and Counselor Whipple.
Yes.
Okay, so that passes with all of us, 7, unanimous. Now we have an applied motion on a resolution appointing individuals to the neighborhood district executive boards, and that will be presented by Rachel Breen.
Hello, counselors. So this is officially appointing those on the neighborhood district executive boards to their positions. And of course, it was contingent on them doing their training. And as of right now, I just have one applicant who has not done their training. And so once they've done it, if that could be an automatic appointment once they finish that. But yeah, all the rest have done their orientation and training, and they're a great group. I'm looking forward to working with them.
Great, thank you. Any council discussion on this item?
Just a quick question. So we've kept the application process open in some cases with some of these neighborhoods that don't have anybody yet representing them. My question is, do we need to vote like this every time one of those new ones comes in? I mean, what's the process going forward with new appointees?
Yeah, that's a good question, because we do have a few neighborhoods that don't have representatives. And when we are starting to get some more applications in. And so I'm not sure. I do know that we do need to do the same vetting process as before, where you look them over, they have the public comment, and then decision on the council. But I'm not sure if we need to appoint them or if it's kind of a uniform blanket appointing throughout the rest of the year.
Well, so, I mean, they are board appointments. There is nothing in the law that requires board appointments to take place in this venue. So, yeah, I mean, if you would rather, you could do work session, you could do a letter signed by a majority of the council. I mean, there are other avenues for doing the appointment, but it does take the majority of the council to make the appointment effective.
Okay.
Okay,
So
thank you, Brian.
yeah, so I guess we could leave it up to how you would like to do it for the ones going in the future.
Great. Thank you, Rachel. Any more discussion? Okay, I'll call for a vote. Counselor Fillmore,
Yes.
Counselor Hanley,
Yes.
Counselor Hoban,
Yes.
I, Counselor McKay, say yes. Counselor Shipley,
Yes.
Counselor Whipple,
Yes.
Counselor Ellsworth,
Yes.
and that too is unanimous. We're now going to hear the quarterly report presentation, the first quarter of fiscal year 2023. It'll be presented by John Borgett, our Director of Administrative Services.
Thank you, Chair McKay. It's a pleasure for me to come before the municipal council and the residents of Provo and give kind of an update in the first quarter of our fiscal 2023. That is ending September 30th. Our fiscal year goes from July 1st until June 30th. And so this is for the first 3 months. I would just mention on the next page, it just says the quarterly report is intended to give an unaudited summary information to the reader about Provo City's revenues and expenses for the first quarter of fiscal year 2023, September 30th, 2022. So let me just see if I can get us on the same page here. There we go. And then it says that the quarterly report contains financial data comparing previous year revenue expenses to current year actual revenue expenses, along with the 5-year comparison for each fund. No data on revenue and expenditures is final until the city has completed its annual financial audit and issued the comprehensive annual financial report. On the next page, this just kind of shows the revenues for the general fund for the first quarter. And as a general rule, what we would expect to see roughly is about 25%, because it's quarter of the year's gone by. And so just to get kind of an indicator, you can look and see that right now our revenues are showing at 23% and our transfers are showing at 31%. I would make a couple of notes on the revenues. You can see that our property tax revenue is well below what's expected, and I would just mention that that's a timing issue. We expect through the end of the year that our property tax will come in. It's one of the most stable revenues that we have, and so that's not a concern. So that's probably what's weighing it down more than anything. I would mention that sales tax, which is the fourth item, we'll show a graph as well, but I just want to mention a couple things on sales tax. As was mentioned, this was through 3 quarters, but we now have received 5 months of the year, almost half of the year. And I'm just give you a little report on that. For the first 5 months, which is through November, we are 10.3% above the prior year. We are 3.81% above the budget. And if we look at the 2023 budget, we budgeted to be 6.25% above the prior year. And so we're ahead of the budget, and we continue to see good trends with sales tax revenue. Matter of fact, we received the November, it takes about 2 months. We received the November sales tax information just within the past week, and we were 10% above. And so we continue to see some pretty strong trends. We know that some of this is related to inflation because the cost of goods are going up, but I would also say that the overall economy in Utah continues to perform, and we continue to see some growth. So we're cautious about it, but just as an update, that's kind of what we're seeing right now. We go to the next slide. This shows revenues as a whole, and it's similar to what we just talked about. You can see that we are slightly below the budget, but we think that's primarily related to timing. And you can see that with transfers, we're ahead of the prior year and pretty much right close to the budget on there too. We go to sales tax. This just shows that right now it looks like we're according to budget, but it's kind of hard to tell on the graph. As I mentioned, we are slightly ahead of budget and even more ahead today because the next 2 months helped us and brought us up a little bit higher, and we're well above the prior year, which was in the green. The recreation, arts, and parks tax, you would expect that to pretty much follow what we're seeing with sales tax, and because it is a form of sales tax. But you can see that we're even performing a little bit stronger. One of the things that's different between the two is that with recreation, arts, and parks tax, there's not a population component. That's all based on point of sale, and so gives you information there. Development services, we're seeing a positive trend. Last year, we were actually down from the prior year, but we're seeing some good growth there. And I would also mention that I went back and did some research, and from a large project, we received a pretty significant amount of revenue in October. So when we get the second quarter for development services, the revenues will even be stronger than they are here. And so that is a positive trend. You can see Parks and Rec, they're above the prior year, and we're right at matched up with budget. If you look at franchise fees, I would just relate that to timing as well. We should come in pretty much right according to budget. Justice Court, for the first time in 3 years, we're actually seeing some positive trends. We're ahead of budget. We're also ahead of the prior year. And as I've mentioned in previous meetings, the state courts had some restrictions during COVID that really limited our ability to function and operate. And those restrictions have all been removed several months ago, and we're seeing that result in our revenues in a much more positive trend for fiscal 23. This just kind of shows the overall fund summary. The revenues we've already looked at in the previous slide, but you can see that our budgeted expenses are about 22%, which is below the 25%, which would be normal what you expect for the quarter. So a good trend there. This just kind of shows our general fund appropriations at the top. And I would just make a note that you can see that we show some ARPA transfers that we made early. But in November, we made some additional ARPA transfers. They're not on there yet because they weren't part of the first quarter. But in November, we did the transfer of $5.5 million for the multi-sports park. for ARPA funds. And we also did the 3 million to the legacy CIP, which was for the demolition of the old city center facility. And so just make you aware of that. We also list down below the innovation grant. We didn't have any spending on the innovation grant in the first quarter, but I have went and reviewed, and we do have spending in the second quarter. And so it just kind of was a timing issue. Those projects are still moving forward, but in the first quarter, there were no expenses. The library, really nothing to really bring up other than the fact that once again, the taxes is a timing issue, but overall their spending is below budget, and we anticipate and expect with property taxes that their revenues will equal budget. The golf course is really a significant positive event. You can see that we're well above the previous year and the budget, and last year was a good year. I mean, last year was one of our first years where we were really fully up and running. And so we continue to see positive trends there. And so that's really good information, positive. And then with the water fund, we are below budget, but above the prior year. And a lot of that just has to do with the trends with weather and usage. And so we will watch that. The other thing that's happened that we started doing a year or two ago is implementing the increases in September rather than July. And so sometimes that can kind of create some differences in the early years as far as in the early quarters for comparison purposes. And with wastewater too, kind of similar. They're just slightly below the budget, but ahead of prior year. And the energy, they're pretty much right on track, actually slightly above both. So they're trending a little bit more positive. And then the airport, with everything that's happening there, we anticipated increases, and they're right at budget on what we expected with revenues. And then sanitation's pretty much equal to budget, as well as storm drains ahead slightly. And then our transportation utility funds right on budget. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that the council has, but that should just give you kind of a overall gauge and feeling on what's happening so far for this new fiscal year. Anybody have any questions for me?
Thank you, John. Any questions?
Real quick. So the line item chargebacks on these different budgets, that's the city charging for services that entity uses. Is that correct? Or help explain to me and everybody listening what the chargebacks are for each one of these budgets.
Okay. Yes, sure. Councilman Shipley. Basically our chargebacks, we have various different chargebacks for different things such as maintenance of the facilities, also for chargebacks for insurance, and for employee benefits, different things like that. And some of the chargebacks are calculated at the beginning of the year and they're fixed. And what we do with those is we just pretty much divide them by 12 and charge it out each month. Other chargebacks are based on usage. Like for example, with our facilities, we have one component that is our facilities manager and the administrative staff. We just charge a fixed amount throughout the year. But then the other component is based on usage. And so as departments have issues with their facilities or things that need to be repaired, they come and repair those and they're charged for those. And that's a variable component. So there's both a variable and a fixed, but that's basically what the chargebacks are.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I don't see any more questions.
Okay.
Thank you, John.
Thank you very much.
Next, we'll see a presentation of the fiscal year 2022 popular annual financial report, and that will be presented by Kelsey Zarbach. He's our budget officer and controller.
You ready for more financial graphs? I'm not going to go into too much detail, but the popular annual financial report is a great resource for you as council members and also for citizens who don't want to go through our 143-page annual comprehensive financial report to know what the city looked like in fiscal year 22. And so this is just a condensed, summarized version. So I'm just going to walk you through maybe 5 questions that citizens might have, and you could point them to the PAFR as a resource. The first question actually isn't even financially related. It's what significant events happened in fiscal year 2022? So we're just gonna go through this. So this page, Provo at a glance, it has a list of some significant events that you could point people to if they wanted to know what went on in the past year. There's also some statistical information that's pulled from our statistical section in our comprehensive financial report. And then we get those top rankings from the mayor's office, and they keep good track of that. The second question could be, who was on the city council back in fiscal year 2022? And we have your picture and the mayor and your names listed there, and then also directors' names and their departments. And so it's a good historic reference if you're ever wanting to remember what was going on in a given fiscal year. So moving on to some financial questions. Someone might want to know, how is the city funded? And we all know that there could be hours and hours of explanation to that, but I'm just going to point you to this page, general fund revenues. And this is going to focus on just the general fund, but you can see that, whoa, fiscal year 2022 had crazy intergovernmental revenue. There's a little note in there that explains that's because of ARPA. We recognize the ARPA revenue there, so it was the majority of our revenue that year. But when you take that away, you can see that sales tax was pretty high, and then your transfers in from other funds, charges for services, and property tax make up a lot of the revenue that you had. Another question could be, what are my taxes paying for? And here is an expense graph, again, for the general fund that kind of show what areas of the city require more budget and take more of the expense. And so obviously police and fire are a big portion of that in your general government. Another interesting trend you might notice on this page is that your expenses in most of those department categories have been going up compared to the 5-year comparison. So it's a good way to kind of gauge what the trends are. The last question we're going to address right now is, where does my property tax go? And this property tax summary shows that you're not just paying property tax to Provo, but you're actually paying to 5 different taxing entities. And Provo is only about, I think it was 17% of that total in fiscal year 2022. So again, there's a lot of other information in the PAFR, but it's about 18 pages long and kind of just has more color, more graphs than our annual comprehensive report. But it is based on the audited financial information, and it's just a good, easy resource you can turn people to. It's on our website, provo.org. If you go to departments, then finance, then financial reports, and then PAFR. So any questions?
Thank you, Kelsey. I love this report. I think it's fantastic.
Oh, and I didn't mention Andrea Wright, who you met earlier. She's our budget analyst, and she's the one who put this together this year, and she did a great job.
Thank you. I would love it if you emailed a PDF to the council.
Okay, we can definitely do
I love
that.
that. Thank you. Anyone have questions?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we have an implied motion on a resolution approving a dispatch services agreement appropriating $1,637,667 in the newly created Emergency Response Fund and transferring $671,520 of existing funds to accommodate the combining of Orem and Provo dispatch services. And we've heard this multiple times. We're very excited to vote on this. This will be presented by Wayne Parker, the CAO, and John Borgett of Administrative Services Director.
Council members, thank you for the opportunity. I was mentioning earlier to Council Member Shipley, if I had pom-poms and a megaphone in my office, I would have brought them today to celebrate what's been a 2.5-year journey of working with the City of Orem and the public safety departments and administration in Orem and our own team to effect this dispatch services agreement. Since October, we have been co-locating dispatch centers, and since December, on Christmas Day, which was the first day of a pay period, the Orem dispatchers became Provo City employees. And I had the opportunity last week to meet with about 15 of them who came over from Orem as they were going through their new employee orientation process with Provo. And it was just a delightful experience to meet with these new Provo City employees and look at the depth of experience that they bring to our residents and that Orem's able to retain as we provide their public safety dispatch services starting in December. Tonight, you'll be doing a public hearing to consider the appropriation of funds for essentially a 6-month budget for the new consolidated dispatch center. We are accounting for the moving of money out of our fire department budget into the new emergency response fund and the Orem proportionate share contribution of the budget from new revenues to the city that will go into the emergency response fund. And this will fund the dispatch operation for the balance of the year. Next year's budget will be reviewed by an advisory board that consists of representatives from Orem City and Provo City, will be presented to the mayor for inclusion in the annual budget. And so you'll see in May the first full year budget of operations. Before you begin the public hearing, you may want to hear from John Borgett, who has been working very closely with the Provo or the Orem finance team to us and the fire departments and police departments in both cities to prepare the first 6-month budget and answer any questions you have about that. We'll also be asking you to approve the dispatch services agreement and authorizing the mayor to sign it by resolution. The agreement is precisely as you saw it 2 weeks ago, with the exception that we did add a definition for calls for service and substituted some language in the agreement. But other than that, it's unchanged from the last time you saw it. So with that, be happy to answer any questions, or if you'd like to hear from John or from Chief Miguel, we'd be happy to do that as well.
Thank you, Wayne.
Okay.
I do know that we are interested in how it's been going and if Orem is happy, if Provo is happy. So I guess hearing from Chief Miguel in regards to that would be helpful. Talking about the employees, if they're happy.
Chair McKay, members of the council, thank you for this opportunity. I believe they are. We have gotten off to a very good start. We had a few things that took place early on that when we were moving into this building, we had a hiccup and had to route our 911 calls to Orem for about 14 weeks. Wow. During that time, we had Provo employees in Orem that were answering those 911 calls. So everybody became fast friends. And then coming over here, they just brought that relationship that had been established over here. And I think that everybody is really excited about this. This has meant a great deal of stability to the Orem dispatchers. I believe, the feedback that I'm getting, and I meet with them often, is that they're very positive about this. We are eagerly working on some technology issues, one of which you'll hear about tonight, that will make this a little bit more seamless and clean up a few issues that we're having. We're operating with some pretty old technology right now, and you're going to hear a little bit about some new technology that will allow us to, it'll make a significant difference in how we're able to communicate with both cities. So far, so good.
Okay, thank you, Chief. I'd like to open this item up for, as if we had questions. I'd like to open this item up for public comment. Okay, seeing no public comment, we'll open it up for council discussion, and councilors are welcome to ask John Borgett questions regarding the financial side. Councilor Shipley.
Was there something on the technology that somebody was going to speak to before we do this, or is there a different item? Sorry, Chief.
Let me just make one note, and then I'm going to have Deputy Chief Headman talk a little bit about the technology. So there is a pretty sizable transaction that we're going to entering into for the technology that impacts the overall budget. I would mention that with the new proposed Provo Orem fund and the resolution tonight, as well as budget that's available in the old dispatch fund, which still is there. We have appropriation authority and we really doesn't require council action, but because it's a pretty sizable transaction and a significant event, we thought it'd be good if we just updated you on the technology. So I'll just turn the time over to Deputy Chief Hedman.
I
Okay, thank you so much. I apologize. I didn't realize the call on you earlier, so I'm sorry for that. Do counselors have any questions? I have a question. Okay, so the cost of the
oh
software
yeah.
we're looking at is the 671,520?
No, the cost that changed in the budget was 135,000 that will the 671 John might have to speak to. I'm not sure what that is, but the cost of this system for the dispatch portion, which is going into the dispatch budget, is 135,000. And then there's some other costs associated at the fire stations that are being handled separately in the budget, not in the dispatch budget. Correct,
All right, I'm
John?
so confused what this item is. So is this item the resolution and a budget ask, or?
So I think I can answer your question if that's okay.
Okay.
So the portion that Deputy Chief Hedman was referring to, that's the 135,000 is included in the budget that in this resolution that you're approving tonight. It's improved. We call it the Provo Orem dispatch budget. That 135 is included there. And then the part that goes for the stations and the station equipment is 308,000. And that amount was approved with the original budget. Well, we have a budget authority to pay for out of the old Fund 140 dispatch fund. Okay. And so the money's all appropriated, but in the importance of transparency and wanting to make sure that the council was aware of this, we wanted to bring that up. I would also just mention another factor that's just important to know is that the ongoing maintenance related to this software for the system will be roughly $27,950 a year. And so that would be impacted, and that would be included in the 2024 budget that the council would approve in either June or August.
Okay, thank you. And I assume since this is for dispatch now, that we are sharing this cost with Orem?
Yes, the 135,000 we're sharing with Orem because it's in the Provo Orem fund. We also have some grant money and whatnot in Fund 140 that we're covering the 380,000 number.
Yeah, like it's all just following the
308,000.
percentages that we arranged already.
Yeah, based on calls for service and based on population, yes.
Thank you. Same thing with the maintenance?
What's that?
Same thing with the maintenance cost?
Yes, going forward, yes.
Great. Okay.
Chair McKay, if I could make a comment there, can you go back to the resolution? So to answer your question and clarify a little bit more, this resolution does two things. So one thing it does is it gives your approval and authorizes the mayor to execute the agreement with Orem City that creates the joint dispatch center. Okay, that's part 2 of the ordinance. Part of that agreement says that now that we have a joint dispatch center, that every year there's going to be a budget that's specific to that joint dispatch center, and that Orem and Provo are going to share the costs of that. Because we're mid-budget year, this resolution lays out what the budget is for the rest of this fiscal year, which is in line 18, the $2.3 million. Okay, that's the budget for the rest of this year. So of that 2.3 million, in line 19, 671,000 is being transferred from a fund in Provo that already exists into the new dispatch center fund. What you're also doing in lines 21 through 24 is you're taking money that's coming to Provo from the state and to Orem from the state, and money that Orem is paying to Provo, and you're appropriating it all into that fund so that it can be spent. So this resolution approves the agreement and approves the appropriation.
Okay. Thank you so much. I have to admit, we've seen this so many times. I just thought it was the services agreement and I did not read it. So that's my bad. I didn't realize we had added stuff to it. Okay. Any discussion from the council?
So they had pulled up the little item or line item budget a few minutes ago, and then it was taken off again. I just wanted to have that up for everyone to be able to see, because it's helpful to see where all of these different numbers are coming from and going.
Anyone else? Councilor Hoban.
Maybe I missed this. I'm curious how we decided what amount they would be contributing and what amount we're contributing. Is it based on percentage of calls or population? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so there are two components to the operating budget. One is based on population of area served. And so for Provo, it's Provo. For Orem, it's Orem, Vineyard, and Linden, because they provide dispatch services to those cities. And so half is based on population served and half is based on calls, 911 calls for service. And then for any capital expenditures, it's just a population area served base, because those aren't really variable costs. But the operating costs are shared on the basis of that formula. And that was just negotiated over time between Provo and Orem.
This is just a follow-up question. I'm curious why we have basically very similar number of calls, but I guess the population is similar.
Yeah, in many ways, it would have just been easier to split it down the middle, but we were trying to create an agreement which would serve in perpetuity.
Yeah.
And so if one grows faster than the other, or one has more 911 calls for service, then they'll pay more.
Thank you so much, Wayne. Discussion?
Yeah, Travis, it just means we need to encourage citizens not to use the 911 in Provo. Have them use the non-emergency line.
Right. Drive to Orem, call 911 there.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, we'll call for a vote. Councilor Handley.
Yes.
Councilor Hoban.
Yes.
Councilor McKay, yes. Councilor Shipley.
Yes.
Councilor Whipple.
Yes.
Councilor Ellsworth.
Yes.
Councilor Fillmore.
Yes.
And that passes unanimously. Right, the next is an implied motion on a resolution appropriating $33,829 in the Economic Development Division in the general fund for a sales tax increment post-performance payment to the shops at Riverwoods. And this will be presented by our Assistant Director of Development Services, Keith Morley.
Good evening. We talked a little bit about this in the work session, and as all of you remember, we've done several of these in the past. So these are sales tax reimbursement agreements that we've entered into in different parts of Provo City that we feel needed some attention and wanted to work with the developers and the owners of those establishments to make improvements that would prolong the life of those retail establishments. So the one that you have before you tonight, first of all, is the Riverwoods. And we've been working with them for a couple of years to put together an agreement, finalized that several years ago. And then because of COVID, kind of stalled that one. And now that we have a full year of tax increment to reflect on, they have performed above what they were doing before they did the improvements. And so we owe them a commitment back of $33,829. And so to me, as I've mentioned before, that's a reflection that our efforts to partner with them has borne good fruit, and they're doing better than they have historically. And that's a positive thing and the reason why we do these. So any questions for me?
Councilor Shipley.
Can you help us understand the difference between this, or maybe it's similar to what the state has now said cities shouldn't engage in? There's some incentive program that the state is saying, we don't want to see that. But
And frankly, I think to some extent, this could fall into that category if it was a new one.
Yeah.
Because the state has tried to force cities to not incentivize, and I have mixed feelings about that. I'll just be frank with you. We lost Dillard's to Orem. That's exactly the reason why they implemented that legislation. So I'm sympathetic and supportive of that on one hand, except I think it's the wrong approach, because there are situations where I think it's important for a city to stay engaged in maintaining the vibrancy of their retail establishments. And I think only a city knows when it's appropriate to do that and when it's not. And for the state to try to step in and suggest that they know better than we do, I just think is an overreach, and I'm not supportive of it. I think there's better ways to address the concerns that they had than trying to tell us where and when we should do this. So I think if we were to try to do one of these in the future, we would have a hard time justifying it, and we'd have to be more creative. But we can do these because we have agreements that are already in place, so they're kind of grandfathered in, if that makes sense.
there are creative ways that cities can still incentivize businesses through tax increment, or as the state?
No,
pretty
I
much
think that's
closed
going to be
that?
really, really tough to do.
Okay.
I mean, we might have to do things like saying that we would, there's an infrastructure improvement that we would have done anyway that we're going to go ahead and do. Or, I mean, I don't know. We haven't kind of crossed that bridge yet, but I think that if that legislation stays in place, you'll find cities becoming more and more creative to try to find ways to help if we can.
And as an aside, I'm supportive
Oh, I know
of the
you
fact
are.
that we're
I know.
doing this.
That's a
but
good question.
Thank you.
Good question.
Anyone else? Okay. Thank you, Keith. We will call for a vote.
You bet.
Counselor Hoban.
Yes.
Counselor McKay, yes. Counselor Shipley.
Yes.
Counselor Whipple.
Yes.
Counselor Ellsworth.
Yes.
Counselor Fillmore.
Yes.
And Counselor Hanley.
Yes.
And that passes unanimously. Now we will look at implied motion on a resolution appropriating $67,627 in the Economic Development Division in the general fund for a sales tax increment post-performance payment to East Bay Shopping Center. And again, Keith Morley.
Okay. This one is exactly the same, except for this one we entered into several years before we did the Riverwoods one. So whereas the last payment that you authorize is the first for the Riverwoods, this one is the third. And what's interesting to look at the history of these payments. These continue to increase, which is a good thing because it shows that the sales tax that's being collected in that area continues to grow, which means that the resale establishments there are doing better business than they have historically, and that the improvements that were made that we partnered in have made a difference and are improving the retail environment there. That specific retail center, the East Bay Shopping Center, I think you're going to continue to see improvement in. That was recently sold this last year to a new investment firm that has some pretty specific plans to improve that center, which I think is fantastic. And I think we'll see the retail sales tax that we collect from that area just continuing to grow. So if you're supportive, we'd ask you to approve the resolution to approve that to kind of keep our end of the agreement.
Thank you, Keith. I
You bet.
actually do have a question that you
Please.
mentioned that. I'm curious. So if it got bought by someone else since we did this, is that per the negotiations with the sale that they get the checks of these?
Now say that one more time.
So the payments are transferable. You said that the unit,
It depends. So for example, on Parkway Plaza, the agreement that we had was specific to the owner that made the improvements at the time. And so that the reimbursement that we owe stays with them, even though they've sold that to someone else now. So that became part of the sales agreement that they had, is that, hey, I made these improvements and I'm on the hook to repay the loans or whatever I had to make. And so I want the increment to pay myself back. And the new owner agreed to that clause in their purchase and sale agreement. And so, our agreement was with them. And so we honor that and continue to make those payments to them. This is a little bit different. I think some of the original partners that were involved in the East Bay are still involved. And so we're still making payments to the same group that we were.
interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
Counselors have any questions? Counselor Whipple.
So this will be our third payment. How many years will this last? How many more payments can we?
So they
potentially
vary. This one is a 10-year agreement. But the important thing is, for example, the maximum amount that we could potentially be responsible to pay is based on a percentage of the improvements that were made in the center, correct? So the portion that we're obligated to pay up to is $1,154,000. Historically, in all of these, the amount of tax that we're collecting doesn't even come close to ever allowing them to capture that. Does that make sense? So it's really just a good faith effort to show that we're partnering, but they're never going to make that back. I mean, we would hope that they would, because that would mean that center was just absolutely performing at an exceptional level, and we would hope that would happen, but we don't anticipate that it will, and that's really not why we did the deal.
So my next question is, since we can't create new contracts like this, is there a way that we could extend this one? Like if they did additional work, could we just kind of piggyback on it?
I'd love to consider that, but I think we'd probably be tiptoeing in kind of
We don't want to
scary water.
tiptoe too close
I mean,
to
here's
an
my
edge.
concern. The state's going to watch that very closely. I mean, we're talking 10 years down the line or 7 now in this one. The landscape may dramatically change by then, and we may have different legislation. They may back off of it. If it stays the same, I think you would have them watching very closely to see if we did exactly the kinds of things that you're talking about, because they would want to avoid that. So we'll just have to see. We'll have to be careful, but I think we're going to get creative because we're going to want to and we're going to have to.
If you need help with your creativity, you can talk to Counselor Whipple. All right, any more questions? All right, let's take a vote. I, Counselor McKay, will vote yes. Counselor Shipley,
Yes.
Counselor Whipple,
Yes.
Counselor Ellsworth,
Yes.
Counselor Fillmore,
Yes.
Counselor Hanley,
Yes.
and Counselor Hoban.
Yes.
And those votes are unanimous.
Thank you very much for your ongoing support. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Keith. All right, continued. Steve Turley requests a zone change from the R18 one family residential zone to the MU mixed use zone for approximately 2 acres of land located at 2075 West Center Street, Provo Bay neighborhood. And with that, we are going to adjournment of the Provo Municipal Council. If there is no objection, we will now adjourn by unanimous consent. Okay.